The Sumerians were not the only dominant people in Mesopotamia. The Akkadians settled in the region north of Europe. They spoke a language in the same family as Hebrew and Arabic, and they adopted Sumerian culture. In 2331 BCE, the Akkadians rose to power and conquered Sumer under the leadership of a powerful chieftain, which chieftain means leader, and his name was Sargon. Sargon created a new empire and became the world's first conqueror. So the army was going to be very important to his mission, because his mission is based on conquest. He led his armies to the Mediterranean Sea, and he spread Mesopotamian culture. Sargon is known as the king of the four quarters of the world. Now, his empire was actually very short-lived, but it was very large. Sargon was very powerful and elevated himself to the status of a god. This is a precedence that will be followed by later leaders. His capital was Akkad, but we don't actually know exactly where the site is yet, but you can see generally where it's located on the map. Sargon's grandson, Naram-Sin, carried on the empire and his grandfather's militaristic values. This is the stele of Naram-Sin. A stele is a stone slab placed vertically and decorated with inscriptions or reliefs. This particular one commemorates a military victory. Now, stelae vary from megaliths and monoliths because those are usually not decorated. As you can see that steles are decorated. The stele is made out of limestone, and it's from about 2254 to 2218 BCE. Scholars believe that the stone used to make the stele was actually found in this natural shape, and that it was meant, the reason they kept it in this natural shape and didn't manipulate the shape was because they thought it recalled the shape of a mountain. Here we can see a narrative without registers. A wavy line is used to separate levels as figures are wrapping around the mountain as they climb. So that wavy line is right here. If you can see, if you look closely where their feet are, you can see kind of this wavy line that they're sort of standing on. We know who the most important character is because, again, we see that hieratic scale. So, of course, who's the most important character? This big guy right here. He's bigger than everybody else. He's also placed on a higher plane than everyone else in the image. He looks godlike. He's this godlike king. He's larger than the rest of the figures. And he approaches this mountain right here. He wears a horned headdress. So here's a close-up of him over here. He's wearing that horned headdress. We've seen bull horns before, so they're obviously important. Possibly this headdress is associated with the weather god Akkad, but it's definitely associated with power. He also carries a bow and a spear. So here's his bow, and here's his spear right here. There are 3 solar deities at the top of the mountain. You can only really see these 2 while this one is damaged, but you can see some of the remains in there. They're identified by their rays. The mountain is depicted as very important, and the mountain in Mesopotamian culture was very important. It's the bridge between the mundane and the sacred realm of the gods. The 2 figures over at his side have been interpreted in different ways. Some scholars think that these guys are priests or defeated enemies begging for mercy. There is some sort of inscription that comes out of this figure's mouth. You can see all these inscriptions that go kind of up. So this could be a prayer, or it could be describing Naram-Sin's deeds. We're not really sure. Also, this guy has been interpreted in different ways. So this guy is sometimes called a trumpet player, or he's saying these prayers. You can see it's a little bit damaged, so it's hard to tell. This guy is sometimes called a trumpet player. But it really looks like that there's a spear going through his throat. So it looks actually pretty graphic, like he's just been stabbed. His Naram-Sin's warriors follow behind him, but again, he is much larger. He's also standing on top of his enemies. So he's like literally like trampling over his enemies. You can see their bodies there. So it's a little bit graphic. This image is meant to promote Naram-Sin's military might, his power, and his authority. This is an early example of art that was created to celebrate the achievements of a specific individual ruler. The ruler emerges as very important and as connected to the gods. This stele was commissioned as a public image, so that means that they would have it like maybe out in the town square or something like that, where people could actually see it, because it's an example of political propaganda. So he's trying to promote this very specific image of himself. So here's another close-up that maybe you can see some more details of his headdress and the weapons he's carrying, his attire. And you can even see that he has, well, I think, sandals on, which is kind of unusual in religious imagery. You can see the details of these people as well. Now, the Akkadians fall out of power after another half century. Remember, I said it's a pretty short-lived empire. And actually, ironically, they were attacked from invaders from the mountains. So after more than 300 years of political turmoil, alternating with periods of stable governments, in 1792 BCE, Sumer is reunited by the Amorites and the Semitic-speaking people from the Arabian desert. And they're united under the rulership of Hammurabi. He rules from about 1792 to 1750 BCE. He makes his capital Babylon. Babylon was a great location. It dominated trade on both sides of the rivers and became commercially important. Now Hammurabi, as the king of Babylon, set out to do three things. One, to secure Babylon. Two, to unify Mesopotamia, at least southern Mesopotamia anyway. And three, to win for Babylon a place in Mesopotamian civilization. He wants Babylon to become the intellectual and cultural center of the ancient Near East. And he actually succeeds at doing all three of these things. He's best known for his Code of Hammurabi, which is the first written legal code. It is a systematic codification of his people's rights, duties, and punishments. The laws are meant to provide a uniform treatment of the people throughout the kingdom. Basically, it's law based on eye for an eye, but it's eye for an eye among equal levels. So you have to be the same gender, same class, things like that to get this equal treatment. Most laws have to do with commercial and property matters. There are a few about domestic problems and even fewer about physical assault. Punishments are based on wealth, class, and gender. The rights of the wealthy were favored over the poor, of course, and citizens were favored over slaves, men favored over women. You could get the death penalty for stealing from a temple or a palace, for helping slaves escape, or for being insubordinate in the army. Laws are engraved here on this stele, which is called the Stele of Hammurabi. It is made of black basalt, and it's about 7.5 feet tall. It's an interesting work of art because it's a historical document because it actually records these laws. If you look closely here, you can see like all these what looks like dots in this image is actually cuneiform describing these laws. But it also depicts, so it's a historical document, and also depicts this legendary event here at the top. The legendary event records a conversation between Hammurabi and Shamash. And Shamash is the god of the sun and the god of justice. They stand on top of a mountain, and the mountain is subtly indicated here by these three tiers that are under Shamash's feet. Hammurabi stands over here, and he is making the gesture. This gesture here is a gesture of respect or prayer. Shamash sits on a backless throne, He has a long flounce skirt on. He's crowned with a conical horn cap. Flames arise from his shoulders because he is the sun god. And he is holding a measuring rod and a rope circle, which are symbols of power, so right here. And he is extending them towards Hammurabi. So he's basically giving Hammurabi power and authority. So now Hammurabi, receiving this from the god Shamash, has the divine authority to rule. So he has a divine blessing to rule by these laws. The king is now serving as an intermediary between the gods and the people. So beneath these scenes, like I said, we have all the laws written in horizontal bands of cuneiform. On the other side of the stele, we have Hammurabi. There's an epilogue talking about how Hammurabi is this peacemaker and talking about all the temples he restored and stuff like that. Now, the idea of laws given by God and recorded on a stone tablet is not unique. It's popular in the Near East. We've all heard of the Old Testament story of Moses on Mount Sinai. As kings are promoted to having this divine connection and they're empowered with divine authority, we'll start to see palace architecture overshadow temple architecture. And I just bring this image in so you can see here are the flames coming out of his shoulders. You can see some of the details on his hat or his headdress, crown, and also in his beard. Very, very Near Eastern looking as far as all the other art we've been looking at. Another area that gained power was Assyria, which is in northern Mesopotamia. The Assyrians rose to power about 1400 BCE. By 1000 BCE, they had conquered the surrounding regions, and by the end of the 9th century, they controlled much of Mesopotamia. By the 7th century, they extended their influence as far west as Egypt. Assyrian rulers built huge palaces atop high platforms inside of fortified cities. They decorated these palaces with scenes of victorious battles, presentations of tribute to the king, and combat scenes. And they particularly liked man versus beast imagery, which is one of the things we have going on over here. They also included religious imagery, which is probably what's going on in this image. Now, one of their kings, King Ashurnasirpal II, established his capital in modern-day Nimrod, which is in modern-day Iraq, in around 883 BCE. His city was fortified with a mud brick adobe wall, which was about 5 miles long and about 42 feet tall. Most of the buildings in this complex were made of adobe, but decorations like the ones that we're looking at here were created in limestone and alabaster because they were more durable. And it's like they created a more impressive facade. So the building as a whole is made of adobe, but then you have these huge blocks of relief carvings that cover this adobe so you actually can't see the adobe. These types of imagery were meant to be very impressive, and I think that they do convey that. But I think especially this lamassu conveys that impressiveness, that intimidation that they really wanted to portray. So a lamassu, the name means protective spirit, and a lamassu is a hybrid creature. It is usually composed of a human and lion and an eagle. Sometimes it is a human and a bull and eagle. It just sort of depends on whatever version they are depicting. In any case, it is this hybrid creature with wings, and usually lamassus are set at the gates of the city to protect the fortified town. So they are these guardian creatures. Here's some examples from the Met, and I just really want you to see all the detail in these images. So you can, here's actually me standing next to one so you can actually see how big they are. But just wonderful detail through the tendons and the paws and the feathers and his undercarriage with the texture there and his beard as well.